Hello, I'm Paul. I'm at Paper Street Audio Company, and today we're going to do a pretty extreme upgrade of the older Mac Pro that we have. So what we have here is a Mac Pro that's the cheese grater style. It's a Apple 5,1 model. And these cheese grater ones that were made from 2009 to 2012 were super upgradable, and is kind of unbelievable as this is, because they're so upgradable, you can make them very usable, powerful machines today. So my goal was to see how far I could go. This will be presumably the last upgrades I do on this particular machine. So here it is. I've got this 5,1 cheese grater Mac, and we can upgrade just about everything. What's important, maybe before I start showing you what I got here, is that there are a lot of links down underneath the video, and this includes the actual parts that I'm putting in, videos that I use to help instruct myself, forums with lots of information, because it turns out there's a lot of little details in here. And while this installation that I'm going to do today will be fairly simple for me, depending on which Mac you have and which video cards or which RAM you choose. You just have to pay a lot of attention to the details. And so I think those links provide, they'll let you go down the rabbit hole and get all the information you need at a very technical level. So I've got one that was technically, it was made in 2009. It was originally the 4,1. There is a way for you to update the firmware to where it identifies as a 5,1. And in short, you want to do that. When you've done that, here are the kinds of things that I'm going to update on the computer that we have. For starters, and perhaps quite obviously, we're going to put in some new processor chips. So, because this is a dual processor machine, what was originally an 8-core machine is now going to be a 12-core machine running at 3.46 gigahertz, which is the fastest that you can run the processors at. So we're going to go all the way there. Next up is RAM. There's a pretty obvious one. These could accept up to 128 gigs of RAM in 8 different slots. So I went ahead and got 128 gigs of RAM, and you will see that it's these packages like this. They are, when you use 16 gig chips, you can put 8 of them in, you pop them in, and you got what you need. Buy them from a reliable seller. I went ahead and ordered them all together at the same time, because that gave me a little extra confidence that everything was going to be matched and everything was going to work. So that gets you your processors, your RAM. What's the next thing to talk about? Well, let's talk about the video card. I'm going to go ahead and use this Sapphire Pulse Radeon RX 580. One of the reasons I'm choosing this, it is tremendously widely supported. It was a card that Apple has used in its own computers. It was used for a lot of the testing. So this is one you just put it in the computer, it works. Now, I've went one step further, because there are suppliers, including where I purchased this, Mac video cards, where you can get it flashed to where it has the Apple-based EFI, where when it boots up, you still see the boot screen. You can select your boot drive. You can do everything else as if this was an 100% official Apple card. Even without flashing it, though, you could buy any RX 580, plop it into one of these Macs, and it would work. So they're wonderful. So I went ahead and picked this. This is the 8 gig version of it. And for the work that I need to do, which is almost entirely audio and extremely light video editing, this is going to be more than powerful enough. And it's just a proven winner. So I had a lot of confidence in choosing it. I kind of gave myself one rule, and I guess this makes sense. I didn't want to install or make any choices, do any installations that required hacks and third-party drivers and weirdness. I wanted everything to be very officially Apple supported. You plugged it in, it was legit, it worked. That way, when I did any troubleshooting with any other manufacturers, I knew I had a 100% legitimate machine, and I didn't have any weirdness creeping in from weird hacker stuff. One of the next things you can expand, this machine is old enough that it only had USB 2 on it. So when I did my first round of upgrades on this machine, I went ahead and put a USB 3 card in, and that's great. Next time around, though, I've got this one from Sonnett. It's an Allegro Pro, and it is a USB 3.2. And so that jumps us up in speed, and it's just a little guy. There isn't a whole lot to look at. There's a version that has the Type A ports, and there's a version that has the USB-C ports. Get whichever one is convenient for you. For me, the Type A ports were more convenient, but the fact that it's USB 3.2, all of a sudden we're up to current specs, which is wonderful. Here's a funny thing. When the 4,1s, maybe the 5,1s as well, when they came out, the Wi-Fi wasn't included as standard. It actually was something you had to add on. Seems weird to talk about that in 2020, but I did that at one point. But I'm going to make an upgrade again because the Broadcom Wi-Fi card that I had installed earlier was limited to a certain set of speeds. And so when I switched to this newer card, it's just a little guy, and it's not expensive. When you put in this little guy, now I can have Wi-Fi, BG, AC, and I can have the most recent version of Bluetooth. So when I'm running Mojave on this machine, and that is the operating system I'm using, when I'm using Mojave, now I get the handoff features and everything else. So this is basically it's the fastest available Wi-Fi that'll work in these machines, and current Bluetooth, so it's wonderful. One other unsexy thing I'm going to mention, these Mac Pros use a 2032 coin cell, little battery, just to remember date and time and things like that. I rarely see it mentioned in these videos, but as long as we have it apart, it's a great time to switch the battery. Just put the new battery in so you can forget about it. It'll last for years. It's great. It's simple. It's socketed, so you just swing it in there. Go to the trouble. Go ahead and do it. The big one, and this is going to be the one area that I'm going to achieve a lot of performance improvements, is I am switching my boot and project hard drives to this style. And here, let me pop this guy out. It is a Sonnett card. The USB card was Sonnett, and this card is a Sonnett one as well, and it lets you put underneath of this heatsink right here, it lets you put 4 NVMe SSD drives in, and so that's what I've done. In fact, let me show you the other half of this equation. I'm going to go ahead and use these Samsung 970 Evo Plus NVMe drives, M.2 drives, and so that gets me a tremendous amount of really fast drives. Now on these computers, the Mac Pros, you have 2 lanes, the bottom 2 lanes, or slots 1 and 2, they have 16 lanes in those PCI slots, and then the next 2 have 4 lanes. So you have to figure out where you're putting your cards in to maximize this performance. The video card is going to go in slot 1 as it traditionally does. So blam, that gets one of the 16 slots, 16 lane PCI slots. And I'm going to put this in the second one. Now what this does is this takes each of the 4 drives that it's capable of holding, and it gives them 4 lanes each. Which is great. Now what we can't do is we can't use a RAID drive as our startup drive. So I'm going to put a 2 terabyte NVMe SSD in here as the boot drive. But I'm going to take the other 3, turn them into a RAID 0, and that's going to be my working projects drive. Now what that means is these drives are already incredibly so much faster than spinning platter drives and common SSDs. So they're just very fast. But when I put the 3 of them together, tell the computer to look at it as one large drive for the projects, now each of those has their own 4 lanes. And so now I have 12 lanes of communication on my project drive, so it's going to be wicked fast. And so this is going to be a tremendous optimization for the computer. In the overview, when you have a lot of RAM, your fastest processors, and really fast drives, you've now kind of maximized what you can do. In fact, some people talking about video editing, they can put you can put a higher end video card than I have into this Mac Pro if you'd like. For my usages, it wasn't going to be a good use of the extra money, and quite frankly, I was more interested in updating the memory, the processors, these drives, because it's the combination of all of that is where you really get your performance. It's not any single thing. It's sort of the combination all matters. The two older SSDs that I had been using in there previously as the boot drives that are now being replaced by the NVMEs are going to be mounted. There's 4 hard drive slots up in the top of the Mac Pros. And so I went to Otherworld Computing and I got these drive sleds that let you convert the 2.5-inch SSDs and put them into the 3.5 SATA slots. And so now both my boot up drive, the working drive is going to be great, and I've got 2 other hard drives now that are much, much faster than the spinning platter drives that they're replacing. So for me, this is going to end up being an incredible performance upgrade, and I'm looking forward to it. So the next thing we do is we open baby up. All right, it's time for us to begin our upgrade process. So we open up the Mac Pro, you lift a little lever in the back, and the whole side panel comes off, giving you access to, ta-da, the inside of the Mac Pro. It's neatly laid out. There's 4 hard drives across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are then 4 PCI slots, which may or may not have things in them. The number 1 slot will almost certainly have your video card in it. And then underneath of that is a tray that has your processor or processors and your RAM. So using the 2 little tabs, I pull out the CPU and RAM tray, and here we are. So now we get to do the first part of the process, which is to upgrade the processors and upgrade the RAM. Upgrading the RAM is fairly easy. There's 8 RAM slots. There's 4 and 4. And in my case, because I have a dual processor machine, there's 2 processors and these 2 huge heat sinks. I've pulled all the RAM out of mine and put 8 16-gig RAM chips in here, and so that gets me the full 128 gigs of RAM. That's the maximum you could extend it to, and so I went that way. A very minor note, there is something called triple channel, which is where if you use 3 RAM sticks instead of 4 per side, so you would max out at 96 gigs, so you would have 3 and 3 instead of 4 and 4, that it runs the RAM very slightly faster. So that might be the advantage if 96 gigs of RAM and the slightly faster speed is preferable. It's, a very appealing option. I happen to go for the full 128, which is the maximum you could add to a Mac Pro, so I just went that way. The processors are not difficult to change out per se, you simply need to be careful. Each one of these heat sinks has 4 holes here, and you drop down a hex screw to loosen them. When you lift them up, you will see, ultimately, the processor chip. So you undo it, switch the old processor chip out, put your new one in, and then you add some thermal paste just for the thermal dissipation. You put your heatsink back on and you tighten it very carefully, not to over tight, not to leave it too loose. So you have to just be careful when you do that. But generally speaking, you're just taking the old chip out, putting the new chip in. The only additional item is that you put some thermal paste on there to spread the heat. So when you've switched these 2 chips and these RAM slots, in my case, I put all 8 in, I switched the 2 processors. Now I'm complete for the processor and RAM upgrades. The next step will be the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, because I got to have everything out of the computer to get to them. And then I'll finish the install by putting in the last PCI cards and the new SSDs that are going into the hard drive slots. So this next part's going to be just a little bit tricky. We are getting rid of the old Wi-Fi card, which is this guy, and the old Bluetooth adapter, which is that guy. So next up, I'm going to go on in there and get those removed so we can switch it out for the newer, faster, better, bigger, more gooder. So here's the Sonnett 4x4 card. It's fairly straightforward, and it's the silent version. It's the new version that came out in 2020, so it's no fans, and they're using the heat dissipation from these guys. And through the magic of video, I've already taken the screws off so I could take the heat sink off and show you that there's the slots for the 4 NVMe drives. What we're going to end up doing is they have a thermal material because it's all of this passive cooling in this. So without the fan, it's completely passive cooling. So now they use these this material. Here we go. Unpeel and unpeel. And there we go. Looks good. Don't want any bubbles, don't want anything sticking out. That looks pretty good. And we're going to drop our 4 drives in. They start kind of sticking up like that. 2, 3, 4. To finish, there's screws we're going to put into each of these that holds them in place. We're going to put the heatsink back on, and then it'll be ready to install. I had already pre-tested this on the system, so when you first fire it up, it will show up as 4 unformatted external hard drives. So that's what the computer will show it as. And that works just fine. Then we'll format it in a fun way, and we'll make some hocus pocus. So I'm going to go ahead and screw these down and put the heat sink back on, and then my boot drive and project drive are going to be all ready to go. There's the thermal, the drives, the card, we're good to go. I need to point out there's a lot of these NVMe M.2 cards that are available, and they have different amounts of performance. This is another instance where I specifically chose the Sonnett because A, you just drop it in and it works, but B, it has the best performance of the other ones that I found. Some of the others just don't deal with the all the 16 lanes the way that this deals with 16 lanes. And so its smartness in having its 4 discrete controllers is what makes it more powerful than some of the other choices. And I'll say something similar about the Sonnett USB 3.2 card, whereas you drop it in, you don't have to give it external power, you don't have to use any drivers, it just immediately works, it's recognized by the Mac, things are good in the world. So it's highly recommended, and it's the fastest USB you could possibly put into one of these guys at the time that I'm filming. This next stretch of work is actually fairly straightforward, where we're going to deal with the PCI cards over here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this guy, and there's a button right here. You press the button and you pull him further back. It will expose the numbers for the PCI slots, and there's a metal bar right there that's going to move over to the left, and you have to do that in order to pull up some of these cards. Additionally, way over here in the corner is the little thing Apple has done that holds the PCI cards in. So you have 2 thumb screws. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do this one. There we go. And so you take this little guy out, and he was the retaining device for the PCI cards. I'm going to move it aside. At this point, we can pull the old cards out, and I'm going to pull all of them out. Here's the old video card, like that, and move it over to the old stuff pile. I'm going to move very respectable USB 3 card, but I've got a faster one now. This card's going to go back in a bit. It's a UAD card, a little UAD quad. We'll put her back in when we're done. But let's start with the new video card, and that's going to be the fun part. So I'm grabbing the Sapphire, and now here's one other consideration for the faster video card that doesn't come up with the lower powered ones, and I just gave it away. It requires more power. Now what you'll see is right here near the retaining clip is there's 2 6-pin power ports. And so what I've gotten is a dual 6-pin to 8-pin cable, and this dual 6-pin to 8-pin cable will supply the necessary power to this more powerful video card. Just gotta line it up and get it. There. And you hear it click in when it's there. Next up, we're going to open on up the Radeon 580 and put her in. All right. And now this guy's a much bigger video card than the little guy that came out. So I have to be a little bit careful putting it in. I am still sticking with slot 1, and you might notice, you might be able to make it out where it says 16, 16, 4, 4, so that tells you the amount of data lanes that are available to each of these PCI slots. So we're going to use our NVMe hard drives and our video card in the 16 lane slots. My UAD card and my USB 3.2 card are going to go in the X4, the 4-lane slots, because they don't use more than that. And so everybody gets exactly what they want, which is lovely. All right, there's the video card, and I'm going to go ahead and plug in its power. All right, so we have new processors installed, new RAM installed. The really tricky part of getting the antenna cables hooked back up to our Wi-Fi and Bluetooth new adapter, so we'll get much, much better speed. So that's accomplished. That's lovely. We put in our 4 cards in the 4 slots, the video, the hard drives, or SSDs, I should say, the 3.2 USB, and the UAD card. With that in place, I can now slide the lock back, and that's going to prevent those guys from sneaking out. What I've already done is I pulled 2 hard drives, the spinning platter drives out of here. I'm going to pull their carriers out. And now I've gotten these OWC Pro Mount drive sleds. And they've got the Samsung drive in there, so we're going to take the Pro Mount sleds, and I could just slide them right in. 1, 2. I actually prefer that the different color of the sled lets you know where your SSDs are, and then the regular silver color lets you know where you got spinning platters. So now I've got the 4 hard drives that are normally in there, except these 2, which had been spinning platter drives. Here's one of those old guys, you know, loved him, great. He was great while he had them, but now we're switching over to the SSDs. More speed, less space, less heat, less electricity draw, just, you know, everything about that's better. So this is generally what the inside of Baby's going to look like. I'm going to push the processor and RAM tray back in, power it up, and then we move to setup, which shouldn't be awful, but there's a few things I need to do. Certainly formatting the new NVMe drives, copying some information back and forth over there. But otherwise, things should just work. The drives will show up as drives, the video card will output video, USB will output USB. Everything should just work at this point, which is great. So that's the next part. So the build is done, the hardware is all installed, and that went pretty straightforward. Got the processor's RAM, video card, NVMe drives, the USB 3.2, the UAD card. One little thing I did that was helpful to me is I went ahead and labeled what each of these hard drives are, what I call them when I'm using them. That way, if I need to get into synth stuff or storage or whatever, I know which drive to grab, and it's just going to be helpful for later on. All right, we're firing up the computer for the first time, and things are working, so that's good. The video card's outputting video. I see both processors are showing up in the system profile. All 8 sticks of RAM are showing up. All the hard drives mounted onto the desktop. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and format the new drives as APFS. I'm going to go ahead and make a RAID 0 out of some of the NVMe drives, and then I'm going to migrate the old data from the old spinning platter disk over to these new drives so that the migration is complete, and then we'll start to use it. So this Mac Pro is currently in service here in the studio. I'm happy with its performance. Certainly hardware-wise, we've done as many upgrades as we could, and software-wise, we're running Mojave, which is the latest operating system it officially supports. So everything's very official, and it's performing shockingly well. So it's certainly going to hold me over until what? Until Apple releases the Mac Pros with the RISC processors in there, so whether they call it the M1X, M1Z, whatever they're going to call their high-performance processors that they're going to put out in the Mac Pros that rumors reliably say are about a year out. And so I'm looking forward to that transition because it seems like it'll be an interesting one for people that are doing audio production work. But I need a computer to get me from now till then. And I believe that the upgrades we've done on this Mac Pro are going to allow me to make it comfortably up until that point. If you're considering doing this for your own Mac Pro, I encourage you to do it. It's not terribly difficult. In most cases, you're swapping in a new card or you're just putting RAM into a slot. It's fairly straightforward. I would encourage people to try it. That way you get some more enjoyment and use out of these older machines that are still pretty cool. Remember, all the important links are in the description down below. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.